to start their own stopwatch so they can glance down at any one time and it might tell them the exact distance they've covered.
This lead pack now is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They're at the head of the stretch. And DeCissa pulls away. Now it's 10 yards and more. Lalissa DeCissa is the 2013 Boston Marathon champion.
Something just blew up at the... Run! Go!
So I'm a critical care resource nurse. It's an ICU nurse that doesn't take patient assignment, and we go wherever we're needed to go. In the car, driving back from the gym. Oh my God, it was a free-for-all. Everybody was standing out in front as the ambulances were arriving, and as you walked in, there were family members and administrators and nurses and doctors, and triage had already started, so all the bays in the hospital were full. There was some blood on the floor. It was very busy. Yes, for us, I mean, we've never had a ward here. I didn't actually do any patient care. I did a lot of movement. We took patients from the ICU up to the floor, from one floor to another floor. So there were people that had leg injuries from the shrapnel, from the devices that detonated. We had some head injuries, we had some facial injuries, we had people that lost legs, and we had some injuries to people's abdomens. Probably the amount that arrived all at once, and the fact that the emergency room still had to continue to function. Along with the regular hospital, our operating rooms were full, our ER room was full, our patient floor beds were full. So it was just the volume on top of what we already had, the amount of blood that was needed, supplies, teams. Yes, I think if it happened any place other than Boston, where you had 5 level 1 traumas, there would have been much more loss. I don't even think we realize it's happening. When it's happening, we kind of just go into an automatic fix mode. Most of us use humor to try to get through the rough parts. I know people were, afterward, they did a lot of talking and laughing and crying, and social work was really involved. I don't think we do a good job getting rid of the sad feelings. My biggest hero would be the nurses that were there that day, that didn't get to stop. You didn't eat, you didn't move, you just kept working. I suppose they're a victim in some sense because they see everything, but I don't think they would consider themselves victims. It was just their job to do what they did. It's what we trained to do. I think it'll always be a different day to us. Growing up here, Marathon Monday was always a fun day. Now it's a day where in the back of your mind you'll always wonder if it will happen again. It was impressive to see the city come together and people work together that normally wouldn't.
My name is Bea Potter. I'm a registered nurse. I work in the emergency department at the Brigham and Women's Faulkner Hospital, and I was working on Marathon Monday last year, 2013. When I first graduated, I worked in a very small community hospital, and so I kind of had to do a little bit of everything. I did obstetrics and some med-surg nursing, but within a year I gravitated to the emergency department. It's what I've always, I guess, wanted to do without knowing I wanted to do it. It's actually my mom, and pretty much on a weekly basis I tell people that half of what I know about nursing I actually learned from my mom, who is not a nurse. You know, it's just taking care of people and showing kindness. So I remember being very detailed afterwards. It being a year later, I don't remember the exact timing. We have a CMed system, or the Boston EMS emergency system, and they let us know that there was a catastrophe and to prepare to do our disaster, and they didn't even tell us what it was. So we actually turned on televisions in the emergency department to get more information. And though at the time it seemed like we were waiting forever, it was probably about a 3-minute period that they came back and told us there was a bombing and to prepare. Somewhere, somehow, someone had told me we got our first victim, now survivor, 28 minutes after the bombing occurred. There was, and I sit here still proud of my hospital and the people I work with. It was Marathon Monday, which pulls all these extra people into Boston anyway. So we actually had the good fortune of having our clinical leader, who does a lot of our disaster planning and treatment, and our disaster management officer on site, and they started our protocols and the things we trained for before anyone ever got there. So first thought, my husband works in Boston too. He works over at Mass General, and I want to know where it was. And you think about, who do I know that's there? And you want to say that, oh, I think about all my nursing things, but the first thing you do is you worry about your loved ones. I actually knew several people who were running, and I knew several people who were working it. And so my first thoughts were, who do I know that's there, and gosh, I hope they're okay. Before it happened, average day, we probably had commented that it was slower than usual. I remember that it wasn't full. There was empty rooms around our department. Once it happened and people started to come in, there was not half as much chaos as I would have thought that there would be. That's still a thing that impresses me, is that you think about catastrophes, you only see them from TV, and you would think that it's like screaming and yelling and stretchers moving back and forth, but it really isn't. It's just finding the person you need to take care of and being with them. So my hospital got somewhere between 20 and 25, I think, by the end of the day. I personally was responsible for 3 victims.
Patients have that were unlike normal ER trauma injuries?
So my hospital, Brigham and Women's Faulkner, is not a trauma center. So we did not get the amputees or true trauma level 1 type patients, but they had blast injuries, and they had burns, and they had inhalation injuries, and they had trauma. I think sometimes they didn't even know what they had. They just felt that they had to get checked just from being around all that. Oh, absolutely. The first responders were amazing. I remember Boston EMS bringing patients in and going back out, just almost running back out, that they wanted to go get more, and to physically watch someone run back into a bombing can still give me chills now. The bravery was empowering, I think is a good word. No. No, I don't. Through emergency nurse training and courses, we talk about what they call compassion fatigue, and when you see trauma all the time, you get immune to it, you get desensitized to it. But I don't feel that, because you go back to work the next day. I think you're a victim if it takes away your life. And we all went back to work the next day, and we all wanted to take care of that next person. A little of it is removing yourself from it, almost putting up a wall, and just taking care of the ABCs, the airway, breathing, circulation. And later with time, you can help with the emotional type things, but a little of it is just remembering the good parts. You know, I still remember this fantastic girl who had some injuries that were life-changing, and her priority, before I even put an IV in her, was to get her keys to her apartment to her friends so they could take care of her animals. Lessons learned. If you're prepared for something, you can deal with it. So when you have those fire drills and you roll your eyes, or you don't want to study for an exam, or you have to do your disaster management training on your day off, it'll pay off in the end. So biggest lesson, if you're prepared for something, you can take care of it.
I saw an individual directly in front of me, about 15 yards away, get knocked down by the concussion of the bomb. I thought that the individual was injured by the concussion and the glass blowing out towards the street. I ran to assist him at that time. I'm sure it's very, very difficult. I have had a situation in my life where I've been able to deal with it, and it hasn't really affected me. I haven't had nightmares, or I don't dwell on what I saw that day. It was horrific, but I put it in my past, and I'm moving on. Yes, I think I was told by the FBI that I was not only an eyewitness, I was a victim of what occurred. So I think a lot of people who responded have had some challenges in their lives dealing with the situation. I just noticed on the morning of April 21st, when I got to the finish line, people started to gather much earlier than normal. I would say by 9 o'clock there was an excitement and intensity in the air. I think it was a great day for Boston. People were so happy. So many people wanted to be there at the finish line to show their support for the happenings of a year ago. I mean, it had an impact on my life, obviously. The biggest impact was probably being pursued by the TV and press wanting interviews. But I've moved on in my life. Things happen in people's lives all the time. It happened in my life. You have to learn to deal with situations like that and move on, and that's what I've attempted to do. Things haven't changed in my life too much from year to year with the marathon. I have a job to do at the finish line. I have to make sure that the area is secure, that we follow the protocol set up by the BAA, and that's what I'm supposed to do, and that's what I do. We are Boston Strong.
Great, thank you.
Okie doke. Woo!
I've been a nurse for 18 years. Since my very first job as a tech, I've always been an ER nurse. I was assigned to the first trauma team and ambulance triage that day. It is. It's also the #1 level 1 tertiary care facility in New England and sees 75% approximately of all penetrating trauma and 80% of the motor vehicular trauma in the region. 2 nurses on that day who have military experience. They were working in the emergency room, myself and one other girl who works for the Air Force. And I think the advantage was that just proximity that day. Yeah, initially, when we got the first call, we were told that there was a manhole cover explosion or a gas explosion in a manhole cover. When the patient came in this room, we knew right away that it wasn't a simple explosion from a manhole cover. And the reason being is the nature of the injuries. And at the scene and viewing the videotape later, it was absolutely, it looked like any town Middle East with a car bomb or a garbage can bomb or anything else kind of bomb. It was classic and made to inflict, the bombs were made to inflict the most casualties possible in the most heinous way. We saw, I'm told this is an approximate number, we saw approximately 30 of severely injured people and dozens of minor injuries. But 30 was the total approximate for major injuries. Initially, within 10 minutes of the arrival of the first patient, it became a basic nightmare. Fortunately for us, we had some really great staff on that day. We had a lot of help from the Boston Police Department and all of our ancillary staff in the other floors. We were able to empty the hospital very quickly of all dischargeable patients. The police assisted in discharging folks that, and some of the homeless, some of the intoxicated, that were combative, didn't want to leave that morning. We had a lot of help from the police in getting them out of here and doing crowd control initially. Our public safety department worked real hard to get all that done too. We had it turned into total utter chaos. It exhausted almost exhausted our supply of blood within 45 minutes to an hour, and it filled every room in our emergency room with a critical patient. Well, we saw basically the victims of an IED, and you typically see blast injuries. We see bullet wounds, we see knife wounds, we see car accidents, but overall it's sort of the same injury. You know, it's still trauma, and it wasn't like we didn't know what to do. We knew exactly what to do, but it was something most of us probably hadn't seen. Post Marathon Monday a year ago, the city and the hospitals in Boston have a disaster plan and carry out several drills per year to make ourselves more ready. The proper application of a tourniquet in when you have severe bleeding and severe trauma, like the most of the patients had that day, it was absolutely critical to the saving of their life. I think the improvisation that occurred was directed mostly by first responders at the scene. We had a lot of our own residents were there and actually ran in from the medical tent to the zone, which was about 50 yards away, to both blast zones, and started directing the care. People were using T-shirts. Marathon Sports was kicking out anything, I guess they were giving out anything they could in order to assist with bandaging and stuff like that. But people were using belts, T-shirts wrapped up, anything they could find to create a tourniquet. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That was, you know, these are normal citizens. There were a half dozen or so real soldiers there in the marathon in the tent who had just completed the walk, the 26.2 mile walk with their full ruck and everything else, and they responded by tearing down the gates and doing first aid as well. But they helped, tore down the barriers. Heroes then began to measure what occurred that day. Everybody, one of my old commanders is now retired and works here at Boston Medical Center, and I think he said it best: we did what we do every day here. This is not news or new to us. This is how we treat trauma. What happened at the scene, the heroism displayed by those residents, by those bystanders, by anybody who wasn't injured by the shrapnel, is incredible. To walk into, these aren't warriors, you know, let me emphasize that. These weren't warriors out there. These were normal citizens and young girls and young men right out of, you know, still in their residency, and EMTs and everybody that was around, providing critical care for these patients and getting them in ambulances and transporting them to the hospitals where their lives were saved. I think everybody deals with it differently as individuals. I think it's an experience-based thing. I think there, you know, some people like to sit around and talk about it. I'm not one of those talkers. I'm talking with you right now because you requested me to, but I don't regularly talk about it. And it's something that I find that I talk with my crew, the team that I worked with that day, the trauma team. We whenever we're together or we see each other, or we'll talk, somebody's talking about the marathon, like we just had the marathon a month ago, and people. And people say, well, you know, we were the, you know, give me a little pound, just to remember that we did a great job that day. Yeah, I can't imagine somebody not being severely affected by what they saw that day. I've seen the pictures. I wasn't there, but I've seen the pictures, and I know what I saw when that patient came in this door. And it is exactly what you see in war. And again, I'm going to emphasize, those were not warriors. Those first responders were not, to my knowledge, I think very few of them had any military service background. And certainly never seen a wading pool of blood and limbs. I mean, it must have been horrific. I would have to say that the victims themselves, especially my patient, because he was the most critically injured, he was my biggest hero. And just because of his constitution and his desire to live, given the incredibly bad circumstances which I met him in. After that, I would say that all the residents that I worked with that ran into that blast zone with the smoke, I have pictures of them with the smoke still in the air from the blast and them tending patients. Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Dyer, they're both attendings here. The two of them leaning over and taking care of patients with the smoke still in the air. Amazing. Little girls, just amazing. I think what I'm most proud of everybody that day is the absolute flawless execution and performance of their duty, far and above and beyond what anybody expected. The ability for people EMS system to almost in a circumferential way make sure that every hospital had its turn, and they were coming quick, the patients were coming quick, but they were smart enough, they didn't deluge one of the 5 hospitals all at once, and that they were able to figure that out on the fly, and that so many people responded by coming in and offering to help without being asked. East Care Ambulance showing up and transferring patients to the ORs on the other side of the campus here, with no regard as to how they're going to get billed, are they ever going to get recompensed for this. That wasn't on their mind. They just wanted to help. Leahy Clinic sending in OR supplies with an ambulance, a random ambulance from that area, just send OR supplies that we didn't have here. With a note on them and said, get it back to us if you can. Knowing that we would need it, knowing that we didn't have all these amputation sets that were needed. That to me is uncommon and just mind-boggling. But I'd say that pretty much sums it up. It makes me understand the true greatness of human beings, and I've seen the best and I've seen the worst. To think that somebody could bring terrorism that close to us is a little unsettling. But I be honest with you, I guess I feel like New York City did. That's sort of that's the common thread I guess we have with New York now. We've all been victims, and we handled it. Our crew here, our entire staff, from the folks that were running up the street from East Newton to lend a hand, everybody coming and basically you couldn't breathe in here. There was so many employees around. It was amazing. People just ran in here trying to help. Of course, we had to do crowd control, and we cleared this ER in about 45 minutes to an hour and a half, I think. Of all the critical patients, but it amazed me the response that the staff mustered that day, and it was our greatest moment as a hospital.
U.S. Postal Service Office of Inspector General. I've been employed there since 2004. I was in the Marine Corps. I was in my office in Boston. Having never been in a war zone, it's hard for me to compare the two, but it was pretty intense. No, you don't really have time to really think about that stuff. You're just there to do your job, and everything else, your training, you kind of revert back to your training. I think first and foremost, based on the totality of the circumstances, based on the threat involved, I think it was safety of the citizens comes first, and in the end, everything worked out. hindsight being 2020, it's really hard to go back, but you know, obviously everything worked out, so I agree with the fact that they shut it down. I got to Watertown around 1:15 in the morning, and I didn't get home till about midnight that following, well, that actually the same day, so probably, you know, around 23 hours, 20 hours, you know, a long day. I was not part of that group. I wasn't part of the searching group. My role was to set up a perimeter and maintain the perimeter. So I wasn't part of the search team, so I wasn't privy to what areas were searched and whatnot. I just had my own sector that I was responsible for. I think everyone did a great job working together. I mean, based on the fact that everyone was kind of thrown in the mix, hadn't worked with one another. There was different communication issues as far as frequencies and whatnot. People weren't able to communicate as well as we would have liked to. But I think overall, everyone did a fantastic job. It's just, you know, obviously with the anniversary recently, it's brought back a lot of the memories of things as far as, you know, it's like anybody watching the news, seeing the carnage of the victims and having to go out and talk to people and see video firsthand, things like that, just kind of brought it all back. But I'm glad that people remembered it in the way they did, and I hope no one ever forgets.
Scripture tells us to run with endurance the race that is set before us. Run with endurance the race that is set before us. On Monday morning, the sun rose over Boston. The sunlight glistened off the State House dome. In the Common and the Public Garden, spring was in bloom. On this Patriots' Day, like so many before, fans jumped onto the tee to see the Sox at Fenway. In Hopkinton, runners laced up their shoes and set out on a 26.2-mile test of dedication and grit and the human spirit. And across this city, hundreds of thousands of Bostonians lined the streets to hand the runners cups of water and to cheer them on. It was a beautiful day to be in Boston. A day that explains why a poet once wrote that this town is not just a capital, not just a place. Boston, he said, is the perfect state of grace. And then, in an instant, the day's beauty was shattered. A celebration became a tragedy. And so we come together to pray and mourn and measure our loss. But we also come together today to reclaim that state of grace.
Boston Strong.
We are Boston Strong.
We are Boston Medical Center, and we are Boston Strong.